Hey guys, this is Fluff, and I'm going to be talking about when to actually start creating a team or join a team. So typically, I would say you should not join or create a team until you've reached a certain MMR threshold. I don't think it's very favorable for you to join a team when you're, let's say, under 5k MMR, because you're going to develop bad habits and you're going to use your time inefficiently because you're going to be working with people who don't have as much experience or will likely just hold you back with their limiting beliefs. It's a lot better for you to try to raise your MMR overall, because that's ultimately what's going to get you noticed by your peers and also just give you more of a reputable background. It's important for you to constantly be trying to raise your MMR, especially the way that Dota is now. If you're, let's say, a 7k player, you're usually going to start playing with really similar teammates in your daily matchmaking, and you're usually going to start making higher level friends, people who have potential to gain more, improve, and also help you network with other good players. This is really key. A lot of times teams are looking for players to fill vacant slots, and it's a lot harder than it sounds. Take EG for example. When EG was first creating their team with PPD and Universe, they were looking for a mid player, and there was not many players available. PPD even said it himself, that the reason why Sumail joined the team was because there was nobody else. You need to create your own opportunities by being in the right place at the right time, or at least being as close to that highest MMR that you can be. People will often look to matchmaking or just learn from their teammates. They'll say, hey, do you know anybody who you think could be a good fit here, or that knows how to play maybe a really good off lane? And if you're that person, that could be your time to shine. More or less, when it comes to joining or creating a team, the when is a matter of putting yourself in the right position at the right time. When you're gaining MMR, it's important that you're dynamic and you're able to play multiple roles. Some games, it'll call for playing support when you're the lowest on the team, and some games you're going to really need to be able to carry the game, let's say when you're one of the top 2 MMRs. So gaining MMR overall is really important. My personal strategy is playing mid when I'm the highest MMR or carry, and then playing support or off lane when I'm towards the lower MMR. That way you're giving yourself the best chance, because as somebody who maybe is spamming, let's say, support gaining MMR, you're going to run into road bumps when you start becoming the highest MMR and the deficit between you and the average MMRs of the team is pretty high. This starts to happen around 6k or mid 6k. You're going to play support and the enemy mid is going to just trash your mid because he's far and above skill level usually, unless there's some extreme circumstances. Usually the best player is going to be playing one of those top roles, and those roles generally have higher win rates overall because they have more of an influence on the game. So you need to be dynamic, and I would say you can start becoming known for things later on, like once you've actually learned to play the game in its entirety and playing multiple roles. It's okay to not be able to play every single role, but you definitely want to have the ability to play, 1 or 2 off roles. It's not really like League of Legends, in my opinion, where you just choose what you're good at and stick to it. In Dota, you have to be able to carry your team and you have to be able to support your team when the time comes. You can't just, in the reverse situation, if you're the lowest MMR and you're playing, let's say, a 7k average game or 6.5k average game, and you're like that 6k player, the person who's just coming up on that. You need to learn to subordinate yourself to others. You can learn from them. You should be able to play support. You should be able to play off lane, whatever it is that your team needs, because you're going to get into a lot of arguments with better players, and that's just not how you gain MMR at all. Now I want to talk about where and how. The way that you start realizing who's actually teammate material, or how you're actually going to get to that team that you're looking to join, is all a matter of networking. It's really important that you add players that you enjoy playing with in your MM experience, or friends of friends, these players are going to come to be your best resources when you're actually going to the next level. Making sure to scale that as well. Sometimes you can't get too attached to players who you've met, let's say on your journey to 4K or something. The players who are actually at the higher MMRs are going to be much more relevant to you because they've already shown that they're looking to improve. And in general, those kind of players are more willing to play and dedicate more time to things like smaller tournaments or simple battle cups on the weekend. Players are always looking to connect, and you should be proactive about just adding people. I've met a lot of people online where I've just been impressed by their play or their attitude. Even as I've broken out as a pro, I'll still add players that I think have really nice attitudes because I kind of see the potential in them, or I don't mind teaching them because they seem to be willing to learn and are very humble. I'll also add players who I share a common role with. So I like to add support players in general, but it's kind of similar with all other players. I know that a lot of mid-based players like to add other mids. You see them all the time. You play against them. You can improve with each other and bounce ideas off each other. That's really important. Eventually, one of these friends or a number of them will come through, but you have to set yourself up to be connected with them and their friends. I would say networking, number one, is the best advice I can give for how to actually connect with people and get onto a good team or join a team or create a team. As to where to find players, it should just be in your general surroundings. Who are you playing MM with? Who seems to be somebody with a good attitude, someone who you don't mind learning from or just inviting to play on some tournaments and things like that. Now, I don't recommend forums. I don't recommend websites or any Discord channels, things like that. The main reason why is because I feel generally people looking on those sort of platforms, I've had a really negative experience with that in the past, just where those people tend to be very egotistical. They kind of overrate themselves and also overrate what they're looking for. And a lot of times they're kind of stuck because I believe in the natural approach overall just because it's less awkward. I've seen situations where, you'll PM that guy in the forum or respond to his post, and players will join the TeamSpeak for the very first time and they have no idea how to communicate. They have no friendship or relation to form their their connection. It's not based on anything. So, these people, sometimes they'll treat each other like trash because they're in a position of power. They're going to look down on the people looking to join their team, and they're going to make mistakes. And there's just a point where you want to just outscale all this bullshit and start playing with people who are actually just going to be higher MMR overall and understand the game better, because you can join a team when you're in 4K or 5K or something like that, but you might not actually develop good habits. You might learn from someone who doesn't have it all figured out and who can't really help you that much. So I really don't recommend it. I recommend learning how to make friends, and it's really easy. I was introverted, and for my very first team that I made, Team Fire, I took a very natural approach because I didn't believe in this whole, telling people that you're going to play with me on a team and we're going to practice and we're going to win, we're going to go to TI. That would have just scared everyone off. Imagine if, you went up, you're trying to find a girlfriend, and the first woman you see, you're like, hey, let's get married. I want to have kids with you. It's that's just weird. It should happen naturally. And the way to make that happen is you just have to organize yourself. So what I did was I had one good friend that I wanted to make a team with. It was Hannah. And I would constantly network with players in my surroundings. And in my mind, I would say, okay, this guy looks like he would be a good support. This guy looks like he would be a good carry. This guy looks like he'd be a good mid. And then I would have several substitutes. It wasn't just aiming for that one person. I had ideal circumstances, and I would prioritize their invites over the others when it came down to it. In NA Dota, there was a Sunday Evening Cup series, which was every weekend, where you would just play the single elimination bracket, and like actually a lot of good players played in it. So that's something that I wanted to compete in personally. It's something that I had a goal for. Just I want to win that one time. So I would just say like, okay, I'm gonna ask the people that I'm interested in to play, and if they say yes or no, that'll base how I invite the other people. So I'll be like, okay, hey TC, do you want to play SCCS with me? Some weeks they'll say yes, some weeks they'll say no, but I actually got him to play like multiple times. Like, hey, do you want to just play this for fun? And because of that, we developed kind of a relationship where he knew that we were actually doing pretty well. We were friendly people, and he might fit in. And at that time, when I met TC, he was studying in university, and he planned on continuing his education. And back then, there's no reason to even try to play competitive. I didn't even tell him like, hey, I'm making a team. I just kept asking if he wanted to play over and over and over again. Eventually, it got to the point where we played so much and he enjoyed it that he was willing to give up or take a year off his university to actually try this out. And from that point, I explained, this is what I want to do. These are the things we can do to improve, and these are the goals that I have. And so had I just said, hey, TC, do you want to join my team? He might have said, why the hell would I join your team? And just continued studying and continued moving on with his life. That's the kind of situation you want to avoid, because if you're looking for players, you kind of have to just take a natural approach. They'll know themselves if it feels right, and you'll know if it feels right. And that way, there's no awkward expectations that you have with each other. So yeah, I would start like that. Just list out a bunch of players that you want to play with potentially. Don't be afraid to be dynamic with it, adding people that you recently added from your MM experience. And the people who are more willing to come around are usually the people who are more willing to accept. And then you can kind of develop a system where you say like, okay, this guy's accepting a lot, but maybe he's worse than the other guy. I'm going to keep trying. Like, you don't have to commit to anything until you're ready. And that's the thing, that's the problem that a lot of people have, is where they feel like, this is the guy I need, or this is the guy who's always here. Like, I have to be like that. That's the weird expectation you create when you're trying to join or create a team. So avoiding that overall and taking a natural approach is what I recommend, and what I've done in practice as well. All right, so what are you supposed to look out for when you find players? Usually people divide players based on their attitude versus their skill. So the good thing about making friends beforehand is that you kind of understand who they are sort of as a person. I mean, you don't know them deeply, but you can kind of get a feel for like if you're compatible with your egos, and if you value their skill, or if you feel that they're skilled. And that's going to help you determine whether or not like you can move forward with that person. The golden rule for me is that if someone's toxic, I would rather not deal with them, even if they were very, very high skilled, because in the long run, someone who's toxic is going to dismantle your team. And you really don't want that at all, because DotA, and a lot of pros will say this as well, in the long run is a mental game, and the players who have the strongest mental fortitude are the ones that are going to be able to work through their problems, communicate, be committed, and be open to criticism. So I tend to look for people who are willing to work with others. It doesn't mean that they can't have an ego. I still think having an ego is part of the process of getting good at the game, because you have to really believe in yourself, or sometimes just kind of be in a little bit of denial so that you're able to just gain MMR and push through the bullshit. Like, people who can't handle adverse situations, or losing MMR and they go full tilt, is just, those are bad signs. So yeah, I tend to look for people who are a little more relaxed, but also I definitely don't want to look for someone who's complacent. That's another key trait. So I guess it'd be easy for me to explain how to find good teammates if I backtrack and explain sort of what my teammates look like, or the traits of teammates that weren't so good in the past. So on my team, I have Brax, TC, Brink, and Whitebeard. So the thing that all of us share in common is that we've all besides Brink, we've all played on teams together. We understand each other. We've all been friends for a long time. And in that way, we all kind of understand each other, our temperaments. But you might not have that. So, as a starting out, you're just looking for people that you get along with mainly. You don't have to be the best of friends, really. Like, I wouldn't say that I talk to my teammates every day or I PM them outside of practice. Sometimes we do have a pretty work-centric relationship, and that's okay, because as long as you're working towards the same goal, you're going to be able to work through anything that you might come across, any issues. But that's not to say that, we don't talk at all. The reason why you might not talk with your teammates as much is because you spend so much time with them in the day. Probably 90% of the communication you have with anybody is with your teammates. So sometimes outside of practice, you want to find time for other friends or do other things, and maybe you don't want to always be around these people. But, when we're playing the games or when we're communicating with each other, we have an amicable relationship. We can laugh with each other. We can joke. We can, do all these things. That I think that's pretty important, because just as a little bit of a side note, like when I'm drafting, I don't really ask much for the player's input. I will ask when I don't understand something or I need to know what they think. But in general, it's pretty calm environment and when I draft. So I think it's important for my teammates to have a little bit of fun and converse and just get their communication warmed up during the draft. I place an importance on that. That's what I value, because I feel that how your team interacts with each other at the beginning of the practice and the drafts will affect how the rest of the day goes. So if your team has low energy and they're not talking to each other, joking around, I feel like something's a little bit wrong, and I want them to be able to communicate like that and just have fun. That way in the game, they're going to be warmed up. It's better to start early than to just, when the laning phase starts, start warming up then, because you might miss some really important things. And personally, as a support, I really value that early communication. That's just a really underrated thing that I believe in. It's different for everybody, but I recommend having people who can really work together and communicate. For strengths and weaknesses of teammates, the good thing about sticking to what I've said, which is growing your MMR, growing your friendships based around that as well, is that you start to realize what your teammates' strengths are, and they kind of start to realize what their strengths are as well. Usually people start to define themselves like, hey, I'm trying to go pro. I'm not the best at everything, but I'm really good at this. I'm really good at offlaning, and I win most of my games offlaning. And when you're trying to create a team, you're like, I need an offlaner, and who do you think of? Generally, you don't think of a person who's kind of a jack of all trades, because you don't know how to place them. Sometimes I'm like, what does that person actually play? I don't know. I need a carry player. I don't need a support player. That guy plays support all the time. Usually you look for the guy who's actually doing well on his role, and that's how he's gaining. You're like, okay, that guy's actually, he's a good mid, or he's a good carry, things like that, or he's a good support. So you start recognizing trends like that. You just want to fit them into your mold. There's been plenty of times where I've had players who are really good at support, and the support role is already full, So sometimes I'd be like, okay, it's a really big shame, because I'd love to play with that person, but there's no vacancy. I need a carry player. I need a mid player, things like that. So you definitely have to look for those things in other people. To kind of recap, I would say cut all negativity, tilters, toxic players, players you yourself even have a gut reaction that you don't feel like you can work with them really. A lot of times that's going to save you a lot of trouble, because it's just a really bad road to walk down. And I've been down that road as well, where I'm committed to working with somebody and they really, really either they don't respect me or others, sometimes even themselves. They give up easily, they break down. And working on a team, it's all about how to resolve your problems and how to improve. And you're never going to find a team that wins all the time. So eventually, once sometimes players create teams where they're in this honeymoon phase. Usually that's the best time in a team's life, when you start your team, everyone's excited, everyone's communicating, everyone's pretty hopeful, and you don't have problems. And that might carry over for a little bit, like a couple weeks, sometimes months in its extreme. But once you do hit that roadblock, you really need to learn. Knowing how to lose is one of the most important things in Dota and creating a team. So if you don't know people who understand how to lose and how to benefit from it, then you should definitely just cut them off right there and then. And there's nothing wrong with that. Just follow that rule and you'll be good to go. And if you break that rule, you're going to learn the hard way. And it's okay to learn that lesson early on. But that's definitely what I look for. It's really important that your team actually shares a goal and that you create your team based on the basis of a goal. Goals for you might look like getting into the Battle Cup finals or quarterfinals or some open qualifier, winning that open qualifier. Small realistic goals that your team sets. When I first started playing, our very first goal as a team with Team Fire was that we wanted to win SCCS, the Sunday Evening Cup Series by NA Dota. That was the very first thing that we set our sights on, and we spent many weeks struggling to do that even. But after a couple weeks of learning from what we did wrong, learning how to practice and realizing that we needed to practice to achieve this goal, we eventually did it. And from that, we gained a confidence knowing that, okay, we set a goal and we achieved it. Now what else can we set? Now, obviously, over the long run, I did set like much more ambitious goals, like going to TI, but I knew I could do it. For someone in an amateur position, I recommend like setting realistic goals like this, where I just want to win the Battle Cup this week, or I want to win the Battle Cup 2 weeks in a row. Small, simple goals like that will help you gain confidence as a team. And also, everyone will understand the direction that you're going in. You might not play on this team forever. In all likelihood, you will not. And you shouldn't add that pressure to yourself, like saying that, hey, we're going to go compete at TI. That's not a realistic goal. Your goal should maybe be like, how do we want to improve? Everyone on this team just wants to improve. Everyone wants to be playing in a competitive environment because, it's much more fun. It's much more conducive to learning how to actually go to the next step. It's a lot more fun than playing matchmaking. It's more organized, something that people look for. Because I know that the very first game I played at Captain's Mode, I was hooked and I could never go back because the game just didn't feel the same at all. It was a completely different atmosphere. Everyone was trying. I loved the competitive environment. I know that for some people, that's what they're looking for. With these teams, you should kind of, make sure that everyone has the same commitment level and that is in line with goals. Sometimes people just want to play for fun, and other times people want to play very seriously. And, obviously, if you had a really good buddy who is only playing for fun and someone wants to practice more than the other person wants to play, then you're going to have really big conflicts, or you're going to have people dragging their feet into the game, and that's just a waste of time in general. Make sure that you establish with the people that you're playing with, like, hey, what do you actually want from this team? What are you looking for as a goal? Do you share or have similarities with my goal? And if they have more positives than negatives, then they're generally going to be a good teammate. And if they do not share your vision or have their own vision that's kind of in line with you, you guys are just going to walk in two different directions, and that's just going to divide the team. So make sure that you're looking for players who share your goals. The next thing I want to talk about is communication in and out of the game. So communicating in the game, it's really important that your players don't sugarcoat anything. It's important that they understand that you're all working towards the same goal, which is just winning the game. And it should be a professional environment where people don't take things too hard or too seriously. And if there was a huge strike, then that's something that should be talked about out of the game. Generally, during the course of the game, your players want to be communicating even the most obvious things that they themselves might feel are trivial, but may help other players. For example, why do people call missing? Theoretically, every player on the team should have enough map awareness to know who's missing from the map. However, let's say that you're playing offlane and the supports are missing on the enemy team, you may say, hey, the supports are not pulling, be careful for mid, they might be smoke ganking you, or they might be rotating to the rune, or I know where this one support is, but the other one might be stacking or around mid, things like this. Other things include like calling items like TPs. You know, my teammates are pushing a tower, hey, this guy doesn't have a TP, he can't join the fight. All these things might seem really obvious to you, but other players will benefit from that communication. Communication in general should be positive. Things might not go your way, and there might be a moment where someone really screwed up. Chances are they know that they screwed up really badly. You don't need to hammer on them because it's just going to make them play worse and feel worse as the game goes on. You need to leave that for out of the game. What you need to do is communicate positively and talk about what we can do better next time for the next engagement, how we can win the game, and what we can do to hold our position or gain some sort of advantage. When people are being negative, it's important to say like, hey, you don't need to do that, or like, you know, calm down. It's okay. Like, we'll talk about it later. Some things like this. Just sometimes players get tilted, and you also might need to say like, hey, you're doing fine. Like, it's all right. Just kind of building your team up is where you want to base your communication, and just thinking about what's actually going to win me the game compared to ruminating over some failures. Other small communication tips I have are like when you're microing the chicken, do something that you don't do in pubs, which is like, hey, I'm using the chicken. Does anybody want to buy an item? A lot of times you'll find that people will be like, hey, I need like 10 gold, or I need 5 gold, or let me hit like 2 creeps and I'll have this. A lot of times it can be a really important item, like a Midas. And if you don't communicate what you're doing with the chicken, they might get completely angry because like they're losing that efficiency, and for some people that's just gonna start a really negative chain. It's really important that your teammates communicate simple yeses and nos. Simply by having a confirmation, your team's gonna benefit a ton just from the information that you're giving each other. For example, if you're a mid player and you say, hey, I might get dove soon, do you guys have TPs? If people say yes or no, that player is going to play completely differently. A lot of times people feel like when the answer is obvious, or if it's just a simple no, that they shouldn't say anything, but a lot of times just hearing it from a certain person might change the course of the game. For example, if in that same situation, if a support says yes, and let's say it's like some hero like a Rubik that can actually turn the fight or lift the opponent off, it's really important that that person hears that you're actually saying yes or no, compared to the carry, for example. In that kind of situation, it's very rare, but it does happen where carries actually can turn things, and we've seen it more and more where these new carries, the carries of the new generation, like, you know, aggressive probably was one of the first to just start rotating early and earlier and earlier, and these kind of plays actually can change the game in a big way. There's also small things like saying, I'm not able to fight, I don't have mana, or I'm farming this item, give me like a minute or two. Those kind of things really shape how aggressive your team can be or how defensive you need to be. And people aren't always checking up on you. Obviously, some players, like maybe support players, can check on you more, but you know, realistically, I've been playing support for a long time, and I would much rather hear someone talk about how they're progressing and kind of using the in-game features like pinging their items, how much gold they need, things like that. That's much more efficient for me and what I'm looking at. And if they can communicate it, that saves me a lot of time, and everybody else understands what's happening as well. When it comes down to cooldowns, a lot of people make the mistake of being too simple, saying yes or no. Hey, do you have a stun? They say, nope. And then you click on them and it's 1 second off cooldown or 5 seconds off cooldown. What you should be communicating and what you should be striving to communicate is that, like, hey, do you have a stun? No, 5 seconds. No, 3 seconds, 2 seconds. That changes the way that the engagement works, and obviously during a fast-paced skirmish, you're not going to be clicking on your teammates. You need to know exactly what's happening, exactly when you need it. And you need to train yourself to, and your team, to communicate like this. That's going to give you a big advantage in the fights. During the drafts, sometimes players talk about nonsense or things that don't matter, like news events or just anything that has nothing to do with the game. You need to make sure that you control that and it doesn't get out of hand. I don't mind too much off-topic things during the draft just because it doesn't affect me or the draft as a whole. But for others, it might actually distract them a lot, and you need to figure out how your team works. Like sometimes when in drafts, I know that drafters are really focused and they might lose their attention pretty easily just from hearing something that piques their interest or that something they want to talk about, or they might just go blank because no one actually seems to care about what's actually happening, and that's a big no-no. Out-of-game communication is also really important. At times it's even more important than the in-game communication because this is where you really develop yourselves as a team, where you learn to correct your mistakes or learn from your mistakes, say what should be said in the game or what couldn't be said in the game, like certain criticisms or things that are more on the negative side. So usually out-of-game communication is about, before a game maybe would be, what is the general game plan so people are on the same page? What are we specifically going to focus on to improve during this match, and what do we expect from each other? How are we going to play around the other team, and what should we expect from them? And I guess more importantly, like after the game is when you start to really analyze what's happening. With anything that's kind of negative or critiques that players have, it's important that they vent what they feel here after the game's over, and they say like, this is what I feel could be improved. This is something that didn't really work for us, at least in my opinion. Let's have a discussion about it. Those things are really important to point out. A lot of people usually are very reserved when it comes to that, so typically having somebody who can kind of lead the discussion, someone who got a feel for how the communication was coming across in the game and maybe understands that someone had a problem with a certain thing, and being able to draw that out would definitely help. Sometimes coaches are necessary for this, or managers, or just third parties. But if your team can just somehow get that out, that would be really important. Otherwise, resentment might grow, and that's just never healthy for any working relationship. So when it comes down to dealing with that, you might encounter things like arguments. In my experience, arguments are usually situations where players disagree on something, but a lot of times they fail to see each other's perspective because they're so wrapped up in their own bias or their own ego to really come halfway. And a lot of times it just escalates way further than it needs to be because they're simply not willing to let go of their position. It's important for everyone to realize that a lot of times in Dota, and it should be very clear, and someone should mention as well, that there can always be multiple solutions to any given problem. So a lot of times people are both right in their own way and where they're coming from, and understanding that's really important. But also sometimes someone is just completely flat out wrong. And it's important for the team to participate in that. They can weigh in and kind of give a simple I agree or I disagree, then kind of tally it up or vote democratically, like, how do you feel about this, player one? Oh, I agree. How do you feel about this, player two, etc. You just kind of go down the line. That way everyone kind of builds a consensus for what the team actually believes, and sometimes that's the best way to resolve issues in a team. It's really important that somebody facilitates that exchange, because I know that in a lot of teams, there are a lot of people who are more passive about their approach because they don't want to step on any toes and they would much rather avoid the conflict overall. However, it's my belief that if you let people argue one-on-one, they generally just don't get anywhere. unless they're super mature about it, which is generally not the case in Dota and I suppose esports in general. I really recommend just having everyone participate and weigh in a little bit so that everyone can be heard and understand the general team consensus. When it comes down to analyzing the games, I feel that it's important to just simplify or condense everything into an easily digestible format of something that you want to see change in. A lot of times people will go in the game and it happens in I guess one or two ways. Either that person is just going to watch the game and commentate on every single mistake they can find, or they're going to wait until the team's gone and then start writing all the things they found wrong with the game later in your Skype or something. The problem with that is it's just very non-confrontational, and there's some merit to letting the team kind of relax, and that's totally okay, as long as that's just not your main communication style. In my team, I typically don't fully analyze the replays until the session's over and I took a break and I came back, watched it, and then I'll write my notes. These are things I think we can improve on. But generally after the game, just narrow it down to the key things you think are a big deal and have everyone just kind of weigh in on it. And once you start to feel that conversation is going too far or too far from the original point, then just cut it for the day on that and just let it go. Usually it's much more fresh right after the game and people are willing to talk about it right then, and usually as the time goes on they start to relax. It all kind of depends on what kind of people you are, but I think it's kind of toxic for players to consistently take the route where they don't actually communicate with their team straight up and they try to, I don't know, in a certain way they by finding mistakes they're covering themselves. What I personally like to do is after some time went by, I've fully watched the game, I've gone through all the perspectives that I want, and I've seen things objectively. I often realize that the initial biases that I've had are slightly skewed, and I dissolve those because I've seen it by watching the replay in an objective way without any emotions involved. And in that way, I'm able to communicate exactly what I feel is the problem, and I'm able to reference points in the game that I feel people can refer to, and that's a lot more healthy, I think. I think that kind of role should generally be reserved for the team leaders, and it doesn't always have to be one person, but just the people who are generally more adamant about their position or how they want the team to go, the players who have a little bit more conviction. I feel like that's the distinction between when it's good and when it's bad. When it's coming from somebody who doesn't really lead the team that much and they're just kind of complaining, it just comes across the wrong way. This doesn't feel constructive. Dealing with losses is often the hardest part about out-of-game communication because players are emotional. Everyone has a different way of coping with the stress or with the conflicts, and it's kind of up to you to realize how your players operate. Some players are better at just being upfront and open, and some players need some time to cool off, and you need to respect their boundaries. It's really important that you understand your teammates. For example, sometimes players don't want to hear these things right after a match. They don't want to hear all the negative criticisms, and they need some time. But if you have someone drilling them constantly right after the game, you need to realize and maybe put a stop to that, or realize that in yourself if you're the person doing that, because sometimes people just completely zone out or occupy their mind in a different way. Some people are better at dealing with it straight up. Some people can't deal with it at all. That's where having third parties often helps, like coaches or managers or just friends in general that can talk to them in a way where they don't feel like they're being victimized, or sometimes, between teammates, if you're criticizing each other, some people hold back what they're saying, or I don't know, they try not to step on it too many toes, so they say it in a really polite way that doesn't really get anything done. So maybe consider finding somebody who's willing to talk to each other and understands your players. I know that's not very realistic for newer teams to have the infrastructure for that, but the best of the best teams have these kind of people for a reason, and it's because players generally do not want to build resentment within each other, and they want to be able to express themselves without damaging the relationships, because that's going to hurt the team overall. But my advice for somebody who's new, just recognize which person in the team understands the other players the best, and kind of let them take the lead in how we should discuss things, and try not to push your own agenda too much, because that might be harmful for the team overall. So how important is it to set a clear leader in game and out of the game, and what are the pros and cons doing so? So having a leader is extremely important. It's basically the difference maker between these tier 2 teams and the tier 1 teams. The leader is the person who provides the vision for the game and the grand scheme, but more importantly has the conviction for the team to base their relationships off of, and what they're actually going for, what their goals are. The leader doesn't need to be the most confident person, but it needs to be the person with the most conviction, and there's a difference there. Identifying someone who has beliefs and conviction and will not easily bend or break based on what the teammates say or what other people believe, and kind of has a solid idea of what they plan to do, and they don't stray from that path too often. That's somebody who you really want to look towards as someone who can actually lead the team, because in a situation like Dota where there are endless possibilities, there are also endless ways to screw up. It's really important that your team goes into games with sort of a vision or a plan, and they understand how to execute that. That's where the person who you might call a leader would come in, because that person knows how to piece it all together. For example, when I might be drafting in a game, right? I might be drafting pieces of a puzzle that I'm trying to put together. Like I need certain elements for the game. Like I need late game. I need someone to take the objectives. I might need someone to threaten the map or to get kills. I might need somebody to provide more team fight. All these kind of factors play into that leader's mind. But as soon as you open it up to the public and you say, hey guys, what do you want to play? I need a support. That person's not going to have the same vision that the leader does, or the drafter. So in a lot of ways, that person might end up suggesting something that could be good for the game, and in their experience is good. But for the overall landscape of the game, might not be what you need, and you might have a deficit. So where the leader comes in there is, instead of saying like, hey, what do you want to play? You might say, hey, I'm looking for this specific thing. I need a support that can disable these targets so that our game's much easier to play and that they feel threatened. Can you come up with something that fits those parameters? And in that way, you're able to build a one singular idea into a game and then not be lacking for anything. Because I've seen a lot of teams where they feel like everyone is a leader, and they're like, they say the drafter is just the person who clicks the buttons. So everyone feels that they can contribute, like, okay, it's my turn, it's my hero. Now I'm going to say what I think. And then it just becomes like a monster mash of all these ideas. And most of the time it doesn't work, I would say. Most of the time. And even in like the best of the best teams, it happens too. And you can see that. So that's where having a leader is really, really important. So just giving your team a foundation to build off of. Getting your team organized is one of the most important things to build your team off of. Having a singular place where your team can find the information they need or communicate the most important things or just hang out is really important. So 2 examples would be having a Skype group where where you update the title regularly, like what's going on, tomorrow we have this and this and this, or tomorrow we need to get this done, there's a deadline, or whatever it is. Or like a Discord, similar to Skype, where, make sure that everyone is on that all the time and they're regularly checking. This will help clear up a lot of confusion and help people find the answers they're looking for, and also just kind of be like a social place for your team so that you're not like PMing each other one-on-one and information just goes by. It's important to organize your details. Personally, we use like a Google Drive, Google Documents, where we write things like what are the players' Steam IDs, their phone numbers, their emails, what is their schedule, what are important dates that they might miss. Also, we use either Google Calendar or we create our own calendar where we can foresee the upcoming month, like what is important, what tournaments are there, what days do we want to practice on, what days are we not going to play on. And that helps everyone get really organized and figure out when they can go ahead and like take a day off or whatever it is, or when they need to be there and when they absolutely need to be there. So those are all really important things. It's really basic, but setting up a Google Drive and having a Skype or a Discord to talk in is really going to help you guys get organized and figure out what you guys need to do to be on the same page. All right, thanks for watching. I hope this helped. And if you have any questions or comments, just leave them down below.